this really feels like Christmas for me because I'm bringing all my favorite people. And what I can say, Professor Claudio Varagnoli, professor at the University of Chieti Pescara, professor in architectural conservation since 2002?
2001.
So a very long time. And experiences. He speaks multiple languages, so we were discussing maybe you should speak one of the multiple languages he speaks.
Not in English.
It's quite remarkable the amount of languages he speaks, and he really has experience of a reference always to ask when he has the knowledge across the continents and the different courses. So really, and he was also my external examiner, the current one is Javier as well in my course. But I asked him to actually present a project that I saw there in L'Aquila. You know, L'Aquila was this big earthquake, and one church is a collapse. I remember just stopping and looking at this building, and then I found that he was actually doing that project. So I asked him if he could come and talk about this. This is an ongoing project, but just to show this case. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you, Christina, and I apologize for my mistakes in English because English is not one of my more used languages. Sorry for this one. And we're going to talk about two restorations in L'Aquila. But first of all, I want to underline the unicity of the city because L'Aquila was founded in the second half of the 14th century as, let's say, a political experiment, because it was founded by the surrounding towns and villages, aiming to get free from the taxations by the local lords. So it was an experiment of an independent city, direct only to the central power of the King of Naples or the Emperor. Remember that Italy was part German Empire, and the shape of the city was so stable during many centuries. You can see here the plan by Antonio Franciandi in 1753 after a terrible earthquake at the beginning of the century. And if we compare the same view of the city from an aerial view from the 30s, we can see the same, more or less the same system, the same organization of the city. In the north, you can see the fortress built by the Spanish ruler from the 16th century until the 17th. But the city was more or less the same in its feature, in its plan. It means that the city was hit by many earthquakes during the centuries. Here you can see the church of Santa Maria del Soccorso, a medieval church near the cemetery of the city. And we can see also that the cracks are the same in the recent 2009 earthquake, like the ancient cracks from the 18th century. But during the 18th century, were used a lot of traditional system for seismic damages mitigation, like iron beams, like in this example, were very useful to reduce the damages after the earthquakes. In many cases, these kind of beams are inside or wooden beams, and outside only the keys, let's say, are in iron. And this is why this is the 18th century reconstruction of the Santa Maria del Soccorso with the ancient cracks, but the church generally resisted to the modern earthquake. I mean, L'Aquila, the city wasn't completely destroyed, but was seriously damaged. It was possible to resist thanks to the ancient solution. I would like to remember that the main damages were especially in reinforced concrete buildings or built in reinforced concrete or altered and modified and transformed with modern reinforced concrete. And what about the general organization of the reconstruction? There were four levels. First of all, the reconstruction of new houses for the population outside the historical center of the city with a modern anti-seismic systems, the project called in Italian Case. The first level during the first 12 months. The second level, the plans for the reconstruction of historical centers with direct fundings by the state and also the cooperation by the universities. It was, there were special plans of reconstruction, but also for the new development, economical development of the region and also of the different towns hit by the 2009 earthquakes. Of course, there were also autonomous intervention for the private building, especially in the surroundings and the modern district of the cities. And the fourth, we are talking about this level, interventions under the direct control of the Ministry of Culture. In Italy, we have the general organization, but also local with the superintendents, especially for listed building, according to our national law for protection of historic buildings. This is an example of the Case project, very criticized because they don't use traditional architecture, and also because they occupy the free lands around the city. But I would like to present also one of the most important reconstruction, the Palazzo Ardinghelli, one of the most interesting building in 18th century reconstruction of the city, where the superintendents, and it means the Ministry of Culture, operated together with different universities, Genoa, Catania, L'Aquila, and our university, Chiesa di Pescara. The building is interesting because it's a unification of different or pre-existing buildings, pre-existing houses, dating from the 14th century. But the Ardinghelli families, Ardinghelli are originally of Florence. There is a chapel here in Santa Trinita in Florence. They arrived in the city during the Spanish rule, and they reconstructed their building after the 1703 earthquake. And there was also general restoration in style, let's say around the 30s. Notice that the building was abandoned before the restoration, before the earthquake, the 2009 restoration. This is a great problem we're talking about. The building, we studied the building before the 2009 earthquake with my students. It could be interesting also. Here we are talking about formation and education of architects. And so we had surveys and also the study of documentation of the ancient plans of the buildings. And we could participate to the general design, the general project of the restoration. The survey, we can see the main building from the 18th century, facing the square and the church of Santa Maria Paganica on the other side. The new courtyard, very interesting, with an exedra at the end, and different rooms and different apartments in the rear building. The studies also point that the building was really like I can say like a mixture of different times and different techniques, which is possible to recognize in the modern construction. And also it was possible to study all the ancient techniques for the reduction of seismic damages, like, for instance, this specific construction of the cornicione, of the main frieze at the top of the building, with brick and inserted stone to reinforce the construction. And the earthquake. The earthquake is, the effect of the earthquake are typical, like in all the city, because at the exterior, the building was more or less preserved, but the interior, there were many collapses of many parts. But this is because the general behavior of the structure was more or less safe, thanks to the ties, the iron ties realized during the centuries, but the inner apartment, the inner walls were collapsed. And especially the roof, because the roof were completely abandoned, not without maintenance during the last years. I remember that the building was abandoned. This is the interior with the court, the inner courtyard with the system of arch, the inner loggia. That is this one and this one too. The situation after the 2009 earthquake. And these images are during the first phases of the reconstruction. Here at left, you can see how the walls are built in our cities. That is, there are 2 or 3 walls close to one each other, with many times with wooden beams inside, in order to create these ties inside the walls. And you can see also a kind of fails vault. I mean, after the reconstruction, generally the builders try to avoid a real vault, preferring a vault built in wooden with reeds and finishing in stucco. And the situation after the earthquake and the starting of the yard, many of the rear part was rebuilt in modern bricks. Here we have the consulting of Professor Lago Marzino from Genoa University. And but the exterior box, let's say, was totally preserved. It was also useful for us to study the stratification of the different layers of building phases inside the history of the building. And our students were able to also to work with the workers, because they helped to recover the parts, the ashlars of the windows, and also to recognize the different parts in order to create a great anastylosis of this building. This at right, you have a classical window from 15th century with a cross shape. The big problem was especially for the inner court, with the system of arches completely collapsed, and rebuilt also the valves. Here you have at right one of the valves in the original state, with wooden ties along the space, along the same vault. So this is the reconstruction, the main loggia. For some vaults, it was impossible to rebuild the wooden vault because they were completely collapsed. We had no traces of that. So this was an invention to create just the structure, to give the idea of the original vault and give also the possibility to see the different layers of the construction outside the structure of the vault. And also the chapel with interesting stucco work from the 18th century. But the decision, the real important decision for the building was when the Ministry of Culture decided to put here the venue of the Museum of Contemporary Art, of 20th century art. And so it was, the restoration was accomplished with also the preservation of the finishing, the intonacy, the plastering of all the buildings. It wasn't, the plastering wasn't demolished or redone, but they are still the original plasters. Inside the court with the new design for the floor, and also the use of modern, of contemporary work of arts of local artists, but from also with an international relevance, like Nunzio and especially Ettore Spalletti, who reinterpretates the inner space of the chapel with this colonna nel vuoto, the column in the empty. I think it was a good idea to reuse and to give new significance to this building. Remember, it was abandoned before as a great presence of contemporary art in the center of L'Aquila. This is William Kentridge in one of the last exhibition at the museum. And in front of Palazzo Ardinghelli, we have Santa Maria Paganica, di Paganica, because Paganica was one of the villages who participated to the foundation of the city. So each village had the right to build his own church in his own district inside the new city. It's a group of project architects, engineers, archaeologists, art historians. I'm one of the consultants. The church has a very complicated history from the Middle Ages, from the foundation in beginning of 14th century. Great reconstruction after 18th century earthquake, of course, which completely transformed the church, and also great restorations in 20th century, restoration in Viollet-le-Duc style, let's say. And we have the general plan of the church in front, let's say, in the upper part of the image, you can see the plan of Palazzo Ardinghelli. So we are just facing the Palazzo Ardinghelli. The interior of the church after the Baroque transformation. So it's a good example of this continuity between Baroque and medieval architecture, which is the root of the L'Aquila identity. The citizens of L'Aquila are very proud of their history and their identity. And but the damages of the 2009 earthquake were serious because great part of the roof collapsed. Also the masonry of the main nave and the dome. So a great part of the church has completely disappeared. This is the situation after the 2009 earthquake. This is a picture of us, I think it was the 8th of April, maybe, or 10th of April. the dome collapsed, the nave collapsed, and it was possible also to understand why. One of the reasons is because the roof was rebuilt with concrete reinforced structure during the 60s restoration, and especially is also the interior, the colors were deeply revised. And look at the state of the dome. We can see also the structure in the roof in reinforced concrete. New shoring, we are now in 2014, but the church has not yet rebuilt or restored. And also in this case, we worked with our students for a project, and we participated with this project to the group of consulting. This is the situation after the earthquake, with the collapse of the main part of the nave of the church. This was the situation in 2011, more or less. This is maybe the original part of the church. I mean, the bell tower probably is one of the defensive tower inside the city, transformed in bell tower during the 14th century. And the inside situation, especially difficult, especially in the chapels, because it was possible also to understand that the 18th century rebuilding wasn't perfectly connected to the medieval structure. So there were the different behavior under the hit by the earthquake. And the situation of the main altar and the apsis is very, and also the stucco work are basically from the 20th century restoration. Also, the condition of the masonry are really poor, like many other examples in L'Aquila, and you can see very easily the different masonry close each other, not really well connected. Is one of the best, the more important causes of the general collapse after the 2009 earthquake. It's interesting also to see the knowledge of the ancient builders, the knowledge of the damages caused by the earthquake. This is the cornice, the cornicione, which is not made like in many cases in Italy by stones, but is made in wood, the short cantilever, short pieces of wood, and then plastered. So they aimed to get this building lighter, not so heavy, of course, for resisting against earthquakes. The debate, or the not debate, I don't know how to say, about the reconstruction, because of this project commissioned by the Archdiocese of L'Aquila, very difficult to say. The Archdiocese wanted to rebuild as it was and where it was, of course. We tried to imagine a project with bricks free bricks, and also maintaining the original structure of the church, especially for the architectural order. The church was more or less in two levels, the chapels and the reconstruction in bricks. They asked also to use a lime wash to cover the bricks. We tried to discuss, it wasn't decided, but more or less we had three levels inside the chapels: conservation of existing decorations, so all the tombs, altars, and the second level the perception of lacunae, I mean, especially with the brick reconstruction, and in the upper part of the church, and especially in the dome, the view of total reconstruction, thanks to the bare brick masonry. And also with important, this is a part by Professor Giorgio Monti with the reconstruction of also arches and beams to reinforce also the upper part of the nave. But the second project, the superintendents asked us to introduce some elements of modern architecture. So a contemporary language should be used, especially in the vault and the dome. And so we try to change again the project to imagine a self-supporting structure for the vault, evoking, so echoing the ancient vault without reconstruct it. And we tried many examples, with this effect of like a sky, but the final proposal may be accepted so far by the superintendenza is to create two like a big shape for the barrel vault with a cut in the middle where light can enter, and so also to give the importance to the lights according to the desire of the archdiocese. And but we are in 2022. I think that the archdiocese more or less is trying to make us understand that they want the church as it was and where it was, and the church is still in this condition. Please note that all resisted after the 2009 earthquake now has collapsed. 13 years have passed since the earthquake without reconstruction. Thank you for your attention.